A young mother on the verge of a new beginning.
She always used to talk about her wedding. She had everything planned out.
She was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having.
Violently struck down.
Not just homicide, but an act of rage.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that.
Police chase a deranged killer down a sinister path.
He was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. Someone burnt the house down.
Through a maze of twisted theories.
Maybe this was a retaliation.
It was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
Until the case takes a mind-bending turn.
He looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong."
That person never was on our radar.
Just an epic, epic tragedy.
I was almost in disbelief.
That's just something that was entirely unexpected from the beginning.
Until we try to rule them in or rule them out, I don't know that any of us are safe.
On Sunday, August 10th, 2014, in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Jackson, Michigan, a quiet morning is broken by a desperate phone call.
Our dispatch did receive a 911 call from a panicked individual.
911. Yeah, I need somebody up to my house right now. My fiance, I think she's dead.
Okay, so has she been sick?
No, there's blood everywhere.
Do you know where it's coming from?
I don't know.
Okay, can you tell if she's breathing?
She's not. She's cold. She's dead. Oh my God.
Police race to the home just before 11 a.m., where they're greeted by the caller and 3 young girls.
He had said that the deceased body was up in a bedroom upstairs. There was 2 bedrooms that we walked past, which were bedrooms where the kids had been sleeping.
With the 3 children who lived there safely out of the house and the crime scene locked down, detectives come upon a grisly sight.
As we enter the bedroom, then we do see the body. It was slumped down between the bed and the wall. And there was quite a bit of blood. At that point, we see zip ties on her hands, and we see what appears to be several stab marks.
A zip tie was wrapped around each wrist, with another looped through it and cut, as though she'd been strapped to the bed and then cut loose.
We, at that point, determined we likely had a homicide.
The police talk to Eric Wolf, who placed the 911 call. He tells them the victim is his fiancée, 28-year-old Frances Craig. He also makes a startling admission.
He said that he had worked all night, so when he came home, after finding Franny in the condition she was in, he then went downstairs and slept on the recliner chair. For whatever reason, he did not call 911 until a couple hours later in the morning.
Frances's 2 daughters and Eric's little girl were all in the house at the time. While Eric slept, his 10-year-old child walked into a horrifying scene.
Eric's daughter, Lexi, went into the bedroom and clearly could tell that something was amiss. She even touched her and could tell that she was not moving. I think she might even have described her as a little cold.
Lexi went downstairs and woke up her father. And that's when he finally called 911.
We all felt that a normal, average individual would, at the bare minimum, make sure their fiancé, the person they're about to get married to and spend the rest of their life with, is okay.
Eric's decision to walk away from the murder scene is a red flag for investigators. And so is his casual demeanor.
When Eric was interviewed by one of the other detectives at the scene initially, the detective said he didn't seem too concerned, didn't seem too upset about what had happened.
Detectives plan to grill Eric about his suspicious behavior. But first, they need to finish processing the crime scene.
There was approximately 90 stab wounds, and they were in a very aggressive manner.
It was overkill. Not just committing a homicide, but an act of rage where it's over the top.
The rule of thumb is on a situation where there's multiple, and I'm talking more than a dozen stab wounds, it's usually a crime of passion. So at that point, you typically look at somebody close to the victim.
Investigators sift through the bloody mess for clues. There's no sign of a murder weapon, but plenty of signs of conflict.
The crime lab, which is the CSI people, they responded to the scene. They were there for multiple hours collecting a ton of evidence.
While the forensics team works the scene inside. Shocked friends and family have gathered outside the house.
I didn't believe her. I thought it was a lie. It's not real. It didn't happen.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that. Frances was just an amazing person all around. Frances and I worked together. We hung out outside of work together. We would hang out with our kids.
Investigators learned that Frances had 2 daughters with an ex-boyfriend. The oldest is 5 years old, and the youngest is 3.
Our boyfriends actually were friends, and he brought her to my house one day, and that was like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It felt like we've known each other for years. She's a wonderful, amazing mom, the best mom that I know. She was the best person I've ever met and known in my life.
She would do anything for anyone.
Frances and the father of her children broke up, but she still dreamed of getting married.
She always used to talk about her wedding and everything, and at this point, she didn't even have a boyfriend. She had everything planned out.
Dreams became reality in 2012 when she started dating 29-year-old Eric Wolf.
Eric was a divorced single father, 1 young child. He had primary custody over her.
2 years into the relationship, Eric and Frances moved in together. Despite working 2 jobs, Frances did all she could to make time for her children and Eric's daughter, too.
She was constantly doing things with her girls when she wasn't working. Even with her stepdaughter, she was amazing.
Her days were long, but her life was full. Eric proposed, and the couple bought a house together.
Frances was very, very excited about getting married. Like, every day she was tagging me on Facebook or, like, sending me pictures. You know, she thought she was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having and having that fairy tale wedding.
But when detectives pressed Franny's friends, they learned that Eric had a dark side.
They told me that they weren't super fond of her fiance.
Because my daughter spent a lot of time with Frances. She was like a second mother to my daughter. And my daughter did tell me several times of Eric being kind of like a drill sergeant. He seemed real cocky, just everything was about him and his daughter more so than Frances and her girls. I felt in my gut from the moment I found out that something happened to Frances, I felt like Eric had something to do with it. I didn't know what, I didn't know how, I didn't know why. I just felt like it was because of him that she's gone.
Police are determined to get to the bottom of Eric's suspicious behavior.
When we interviewed him, he stated when he saw her in the condition she was in, he did not call 911, and he didn't seem too upset about what had happened. At that point, He was somebody, definitely a person of interest in the homicide of Franny Craig.
Coming up, Eric's story gets stranger by the minute.
I didn't know if this was, like self-inflicted accident.
That's what we need to find out too.
A tiny clue reveals a big surprise.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
And when police find the killer, it shocks everyone.
I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now.
After calling 911 following the brutal murder of his fiancée, Frances Craig, Eric Wolf is questioned by police about how he discovered his fiancée's body.
I came home this morning because I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I went upstairs, I checked both the girls' rooms before going in our bedroom.
Okay, so you came around to the foot of the bed and kind of looked to see where she was at.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay. Did you see anything on the mattress when you first came in?
I saw, I guess I might have saw that streak, but it didn't jump out like blood or anything.
Okay, so you saw something that just didn't jump out to you.
Yeah,
So this is bad.
Eric did not seem to register surprise, anger, hurt, anything that I think we all normally would want to see from a loved one when somebody is killed.
I thought maybe she had been drinking or something because she was in like almost like a funny position on the floor, which she doesn't drink hardly ever. I knew better than to wake her. I know from prior experience, whenever I've woken her up, she's not a morning person and I get yelled at.
As the interview creeped close to an hour, Eric suggests a much darker reason for ignoring his fiancée sprawled out on the bedroom floor.
Up until just now, maybe since we've been here, I thought that if it wasn't an accident, then it was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
He indicated that he thought maybe she had committed suicide and just did not want to deal with it at that point. We found that being very odd and a red flag. Typically on a suicide, you'll find one stab wound or one gunshot wound. You won't find multiple stab wounds.
The prospect of Franny inflicting 90 stab wounds with her hands zip-tied sounds preposterous to the police. Even if it was physically possible, why wouldn't Eric have reacted with alarm?
So you didn't want to come to grips with it if she had done so.
Right, because
you don't want to.
To investigators, Eric's shifting story doesn't add up. Why would a woman everyone described as happy and carefree take her own life?
And the only reason I say self-induced is just because of how high-strung everything is right before this wedding, and
it's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Eric's strange comments could signal that he's traumatized over the death of his fiancée, or that he's hiding something. Determined to mine the truth, detectives decide to go right at their prime suspect.
Did you?
No.
Know what?
No, I didn't do this. I didn't know anything about it. I walked in and I walked out, went to sleep, got up, went back in and reported it.
But that brings me back to the questions we just asked. You made it at least halfway into that bedroom.
I did make it, and I admit that, and I'll admit that in front of whoever needs to hear it. But I want to make that perfectly clear that my stance on this is exactly what I said. I went in for whatever reason it was. I didn't react.
Without forensic evidence to hold him, Eric is free to go, but investigators vow to keep their eye on him. And the deeper they look, the more circumstantial evidence starts to build up.
We did do a pretty thorough background, as we always do. And one thing we found out is that Eric did have a little bit of assaultive past with prior girlfriends and an ex-wife. It seems like he has some violent tendencies.
One of the strangest facts in this case is that Eric Wolf has a father who is serving a life sentence in prison for his own first-degree murder conviction.
He was convicted on a cold case homicide investigation in the 90s and was serving life in prison for murder. So that certainly put up a red flag to us.
Was it possible that violent tendencies run in the family? Even if they did, what possible reason would Eric have to want his fiancée dead?
The homicide occurred in August, and I believe their wedding was planned in September. We talked with her parents and her friends. They told me that Franny had second thoughts, and they were trying to convince her that if she was not prepared to get married, that maybe she should wait. And they also said Eric had second thoughts. Eric may have got cold feet, didn't want to get married, didn't know how to end the relationship.
While police work diligently to prove Eric's guilt, Frances's friends wait and wonder.
We didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on and what happened with Frances and how she was murdered. We just knew she was dead.
Behind the scenes, police work tirelessly. They obtain a search warrant to collect Frances's and Eric's electronics, but quickly realize that Frances's cell phone is missing.
We do find the cell phone near Franny's house. It had been thrown up against a tree and damaged. Again, we're thinking that the cell phone has some pretty valuable information.
The cellular phone data quite often can be some of the most compelling evidence.
We were able to get the phone records, and nothing really stuck out as being her, Franny communicating with anybody that would give us suspicion.
With no unusual cell phone activity or signs of forced entry on the day of the murder, police stay focused on Eric.
Eric Wolf at the time was at work, and investigators went and checked out, what they could to verify his alibi.
Police checked the company's security cameras.
They do have one entrance. They do have a time card check-in, check-out system. We were able to verify he was at work, or allegedly at work, when the incident occurred. The problem with the system is there's some other exits that they're not supposed to use, but some of them have cameras, but other ones do not.
Was he able to leave his place of employment and get home to commit a murder and have all of that be undetected? Eric was the only person we could figure who would have any reason to want.
Police investigating the homicide of 28-year-old Frances Craig cannot confirm her fiancé's alibi. Since not every exit at his workplace had a security camera.
We couldn't rule out that sometime during the night he left and then came back.
Eric's shaky alibi and suspicious behavior at the crime scene doesn't give police enough to arrest him, but it does leave them with a drastic course of action.
If you are operating in a murder investigation thinking that man killed his fiancée in the home where the children were, you are thinking, we want to keep the children safe. We kept Eric's daughter from him while we tried to figure out what happened to Franny.
Both Eric's and Franny's daughters are removed from Eric's home and put in the custody of family members. With pressure mounting, detectives need to move fast to prove their theory or find a more plausible one.
At that point, we tried to determine any communication Franny may have been having with someone other than her fiancé.
Franny had an ex-boyfriend. He no longer lived in the area, but he had returned to the area recently and had some level of connection or interaction with Franny.
The police press Franny's ex. Could he have committed this heinous crime?
That young man was a nice young man, came from a very, very nice family.
And he did have an alibi where he was at the time of the incident. We were able to verify that alibi, so we were able to eliminate him.
If no one in Frances's immediate circle wished her harm, what about her coworkers? Detectives learned that while Frances worked at a retail store, she was involved in a frightening incident.
Where Franny was working, there was a couple shoplifters that had stolen some clothing. She confronted them.
The confrontation turned to violence when the mother of the two young shoplifters jumped in, attacking Frances. The assault left Frances with a severe eye injury, as well as emotional scars.
The incident at work left Frances really scared, nervous, cautious.
The mother of the shoplifters was actually criminally charged for a crime for the assault, some type of unarmed robbery. She was convicted.
So there was some concern that maybe this was a retaliation for that situation.
We did surprise them with a visit. They did have alibis on where they would have been at that time that the incident occurred.
Investigators are able to verify those alibis, eliminating the women as suspects. Frustrated detectives are still hoping that DNA from the crime scene will help them find the killer. But while they wait for results from the crime lab, the people of Jackson attend Franny's funeral, their emotions raw from the news of her violent death.
Her mail carrier showed up to her funeral because she left such an impact on that person. That's how loved and how missed Frances Craig is.
This was definitely a shock to the community because we don't have that many homicides.
I was scared. I just didn't know what to expect.
I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to do anything because we still had no answers as to what happened.
The overwhelming feeling was the pressure we were under to get this right.
Determined to find justice for Franny, investigators continue to drill down on Frances's fiancé. Hoping for an inside look at Eric Wolf, they bring in one of the couple's former roommates.
Ryan Marshall was friends with Eric Wolf. So Eric and Franny welcomed Ryan into their home to stay with them.
His house had caught on fire, and she was trying to help a friend out.
He lived with them until April of 2014. The homicide happened August of 2014, so he had a pretty good knowledge of the two of them. He said everything was good, and he actually vouched for Eric, saying Eric was a really good guy and a friend for a long time, and doesn't feel that Eric would ever do anything to harm Franny.
Speaking with Ryan doesn't give police new reasons to suspect Eric, but it doesn't clear him either.
3 months in, we've pretty much eliminated everybody of interest, anyone close to Franny other than Eric. But we don't have enough evidence to present to the prosecutor.
But then, a new piece of information arrives that brings a new suspect into the spotlight.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip.
3 months after Frances Craig's murder, the lab results from the crime scene finally arrive, and they provide a huge break in the case.
We're notified through a national index. The DNA located on the zip ties matched DNA in a database.
When somebody commits a felony, they have to submit to a DNA test. Somebody's DNA showed up on the zip ties that were used in the homicide. We get a name of Cortez Butler.
Who is Cortez Butler? Police waste no time looking into his criminal record.
We find out Cortez Butler served approximately 25 years for murder. and was currently on parole in the Detroit area.
But we knew almost nothing else. We tried to determine if we could connect Cortez Butler to Franny Craig, to Eric Wolf, and we came up with nothing. We tried to determine if he had family locally, and we came up with nothing.
In fact, Cortez Butler appears to have no connection to Jackson whatsoever.
So we look in our database to see if we have any Cortez Butlers in any police report we've done, any place in Jackson County, and we find none.
Then it was this mad scramble of, well, then how do we even tie Cortez Butler to this? For all we know, he may have worked at Home Depot, and his DNA may be on these zip ties for a completely innocent reason.
The investigators connected with Cortez's parole officer. They got Cortez's phone number. A search warrant was prepared and signed for Cortez Butler's phone records. We learned that Cortez Butler's phone was in Jackson on the early morning hours of August 10th, the actual time of the murder. The rest of those phone records almost exclusively placed it in and around the greater Detroit area, never in Jackson.
But what reason would Butler have to harm Franny?
Eric remained the prime suspect. He was the only dude with a motive.
Maybe Eric was not ready to get married and didn't know how to end a relationship.
So then the thought process was, did Eric hire this person to kill Franny?
The cell phone records also connect Butler to some other shady characters.
We were able to identify a Clifford and Rodney McKee as being connected to Cortez Butler. Clifford McKee lived in the Detroit area. Clifford McKee was in prison for approximately 20 years for murder. We found out that Rodney McKee, he was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. We found out that he had committed arson.
The arson that Rodney McKee perpetrated was against Donna and Ryan Marshall.
The police are stunned. Ryan Marshall is Eric Wolf's friend, the one who had been welcomed into Franny and Eric's home after his house burned down. But what kind of a connection could Ryan possibly have to a drug dealer like Rodney McKee?
Ryan Marshall's mother had been a heroin dealer for Rodney McKee.
But after months of dealing for Rodney, Ryan's mother decided she wanted out.
Donna Marshall refused to sell heroin for Rodney McKee.
Rodney didn't like to be told no.
Ryan's mother, Donna, held her ground, but Rodney retaliated.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it.
Ryan witnessed it all. He then contacted the police.
What was the connection between Eric Wolf, Cortez Butler, the Marshalls, and a drug dealer from Detroit? Detectives knew there was only one person who could answer the question, and soon they'd have a chance to ask him face to face.
Cortez Butler was arrested for yet another murder. Not Franny's murder, but another murder in the greater Detroit area.
We went down there in Detroit with one sole purpose: to gather information from Cortez Butler on what happened to Franny and hopefully be able to explain to us what Eric's role in this whole thing was. But Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal.
It was clear that whatever Cortez was going to say, it was not going to be
investigators have DNA evidence and phone records that link convicted killer Cortez Butler to Francis Craig's murder. They arrange to talk to him while he's detained for an unrelated homicide. But he immediately tries to shut them down.
Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal. I said, no one is giving you any kind of a deal without anyone knowing what you have to say.
Detectives press Butler hard until he finally agrees to talk. But only on one condition.
Cortez very pointedly and specifically asked repeatedly to not have the interview recorded.
If detectives agree not to record the interview, there's a chance Butler's testimony won't stand up in court. Still, with no other leads in the case, they decide to roll the dice.
We were there interviewing Cortez in the first place because we need to find out Eric Wolf's involvement in this. And it was dire that we did so as the children were about to go back with Eric Wolf. The whole idea for that was to keep these kids safe.
So the detectives tried to read him his rights. He didn't even want to be bothered with the rights. I know my rights. I think it was, bro, I know my rights, bro.
Butler wastes no time getting right to the point.
Cortez looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong." And I said, "Have what all wrong?" And he, at that time, let us know that Eric had absolutely nothing to do with this murder.
He goes, "I don't know this dude you're talking about, know nothing about him. Just trust me, he was not involved in this whatsoever."
The statement contradicts one of the investigators' strongest leads, but the next thing Butler says is even more explosive.
Cortez identifies himself as the killer. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now, because I was almost in disbelief.
If Eric wasn't involved, why had this cold-blooded criminal murdered a woman to whom he had no obvious connection? It all went back to Rodney McKee's arson case.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it. Ryan Marshall was a key witness in his arson case.
He made some threats to Ryan that either he not agree to testify or he was going to be killed.
Cortez told us that he had been hired by Rodney McKee to kill Ryan Marshall.
First, Butler had to find Ryan, who was homeless because of the fire.
So we found out from Cortez Butler that they had bad information. They had information that Ryan Marshall was living with Francis Craig and Eric Wolf.
Cortez Butler entered Francis and Eric's house to kill someone who was no longer there.
Franny wasn't even the intended target. Franny was as innocent of a victim as anybody could ever be. When he opened the door, he had made the decision that he was killing somebody while he was there.
He doesn't have to force entry. He gets into the house. He noticed the bedrooms have some kids in it. He walks past them, and he goes to Franny Craig's room. When he gets to Franny Craig's room, he asks her where Ryan is. She said he's not there. Cortez tells Franny not to look at him. In his words, he stated she looked at him, so he had to kill her.
The horrific details that Cortez reveals next leave detectives with no doubt about the guilt of the man sitting across from them.
He decided to bind her, trying to get information from her, but she would not cooperate.
Cortez stabbed her multiple times.
We will never know how long he took to torture her and butcher her. And it clearly took time and effort to stab and slice her in the manner that he did. She died in the service of keeping Ryan's identity and his location secret, and/or she quite frankly just didn't know.
Cortez Butler's chilling confession is nothing short of a game changer, both for detectives and for Eric Wolf.
It eliminated our hypothesis that Eric Wolf was responsible for Franny's death.
Eric wasn't involved. He's an odd duck kind of guy.
Eric was able to regain custody of his daughter.
I took from this case that we can never jump to conclusions. I was pretty convinced that he did it, not to the point that I could charge him, but I was pretty convinced I had the right person.
Now that investigators do have the right person, they're determined to put Cortez Butler away for life. But all of that is in jeopardy.
I didn't believe that Cortez's confession would be legally admissible in court because it wasn't recorded. And if Cortez Butler ever walked free again, I don't know that any of us are safe.
After months of dead ends, investigators finally have a confession from Francis Craig's killer. But prosecutors are concerned that his testimony may not hold up in court.
I was concerned that it would be legally inadmissible because it wasn't recorded. He was basically told, we're not planning to use this in court against you. I was concerned that he had not been properly advised of his Miranda rights. But we still had his DNA on the zip ties and the cell phone records. So I kept thinking, and I finally got myself legally to a point where I was convinced that we need to give this a shot.
In October of 2015, Cortez Butler is charged with Francis's murder. When the trial begins 6 months later, Butler appears relaxed, almost giddy.
Cortez really seemed to thrive in that trial atmosphere. He would seek out cameras and smile at them, give them this big, full teeth smile.
He wanted to fight just because he could. He wanted to run the show just because he could.
But that's just a warm-up for the verbal assault he launches into when he takes the stand.
Cortez Butler was a monster at that trial. He bragged on how many bodies he had. It was unbearable.
Butler gleefully describes his murderous past in gory detail. But when asked about killing Francis, he fiercely denies it.
He clearly was so excited to say why he didn't commit this murder because he pleads to all of his murders, and he clearly didn't commit this one because he didn't plead to it.
Butler also denies ever confessing to police. But in a victory for prosecutors, the judge allows detectives to testify about Butler's confession.
We're able to get past that piece because he wasn't in custody for our case. He wasn't actually entitled to his Miranda warnings.
Eyewitness accounts play a major role in trying to move the jury, beginning with Eric's daughter, who found Franny dead.
Alexis was our first witness up there, and I don't know that I will ever forget the audible gasps and sobs and emotion pouring from the jury just from that first witness.
The physical evidence is laid out.
We have Cortez Butler's DNA on the zip ties that were used in the homicide, and we also have phone tracking information showing Cortez Butler and Jackson.
Prosecutors make a compelling case, but without a recording of Butler's confession. It's the detective's word against Butler's. When the jury returns with the verdict, there's no guarantee which way the cards will fall.
Cortez Butler was convicted of first-degree murder, and he won't ever walk free again.
The sentence was life without the possibility of parole for the premeditation murder of Franny Craig.
This was a complicated story to tell to a jury. It is a difficult one for all of us to wrap our brains around, even still.
Cortez goes to look for Ryan at her house, and he doesn't find him, and murders Franny in her own bed while she's doing nothing wrong.
Franny had no connection to her killer whatsoever. We can rest maybe a little easier that the bad guys won't ever hurt anybody else, at least not outside of the walls of prison. But none of it brings Franny back.
Today, Francis's two daughters live with their father. Those closest to Francis do everything they can to hold on to her memory.
Franny's family, I know, they've been lost ever since. I've been lost ever since Francis has been murdered.
I want people to remember how happy of a person she was, how generous, how nice and kind she was.
I miss Francis so much, and there's not a day that goes by that I do not think about her. I know that she's watching over everybody and making sure that everybody's good, because that's the type of person she was.
I wish I had known her, and I hope I honored her in my handling of this case.
A college student with a bright future.
He was a journalism and history major who planned to go to law school.
He had a huge social group. He was very well liked.
Is found murdered in the middle of town.
The wound was so deep, the blade of the knife nicked the spine.
Sending police hunting for an elusive killer.
This case was a true mystery, a true whodunit.
He was depicted as a promiscuous young man who could have been killed by anybody.
And when they catch him, it leaves everyone blindsided.
They did not want to believe this was true.
And that was pretty surprising.
When we figured out,
Columbia, Missouri is best known as the home of the University of Missouri.
I think many people would consider us a college town. This is a city, small city with 30,000 students, coming in.
For the Columbia Police Department, a neighborhood of rowdy kids is usually as bad as it gets.
Mainly a lot of college-related crimes, such as the parties and alcohol offenses. Homicides in general were unheard of.
That all changes one afternoon in June 2004.
I received a call that someone had found a body in the East Campus area, and because I'm the East District Commander, I headed towards the scene.
Schwartz arrives to find a team of officers already securing the area.
The body was in between two apartments, lying face up, and he only had boxer shorts on. His throat had been slit, most probably with a knife. It was a very large and gaping wound. It was very deep. There's a few other abrasions on the upper body. So it was a very violent action, just a very violent crime.
I was a student in college, and seeing this in a place I knew really well was tough.
The forensics team processes the scene while police search the area carefully, but they can't locate a murder weapon or ID on the body.
We started talking with people in the area to see if anyone knew this particular person.
This was a part of town where everybody really knows everybody else. Everybody knows everybody else's business.
One onlooker thinks they recognize the dead young man.
The body was identified as Jesse Valencia. He was a young man attending the University of Missouri, and we found out that he lived in the neighborhood, block and a half from where we found his body.
The 23-year-old lived alone in an apartment just off campus. Police need to know if that's where the crime got its start.
We opened it up and started to look for any initial type evidence, trying to figure out who could have done this and for what reason.
The forensic team does a thorough sweep of the apartment, bagging Jesse's cell phone, cigarettes, and other items, while police canvass neighbors to see if they noticed anything suspicious the night before.
His neighbor admitted coming home drunk about 3 in the morning and going to bed. He was awakened by yelling that was going on next door. This neighbor actually pounded on the door and then went back to sleep.
The neighbor recalls that the shouting was late, almost 4 o'clock in the morning. Police are curious who was in the apartment with Jesse and what could they have been arguing about.
That obviously started to help us narrow down the time frame of when this may have occurred, but that's all we had to work with at that point.
There were no real clues as to who had murdered this young man.
A few hours into the investigation, another young man arrives at the scene in a flood of tears.
This guy named Jack Barry told investigators he was Jesse's former boyfriend who just lived a few blocks away. A friend had called Jack Barry saying that Jesse was dead.
If he had a relationship with Jesse Valencia, he was definitely a person the detectives wanted to talk to.
Jack agrees to come down to the station for routine questioning. But first, he helps detectives track down Jesse's family in Kentucky.
They called me on the phone, and a detective told me that Jesse had been killed, and I pretty much just took off running through the house and ran out my front door screaming. Just too much. Even when he was a little boy, Jesse never had trouble making friends. Everybody wanted to be around him because he was constantly smiling, laughing, and Jesse told me he was gay when he was 10 years old. He started crying, he got pretty emotional, and he said that he was afraid that I was gonna hate him. And I told him that there was nothing in the world that could make me hate him. After that, he seemed pretty comfortable with himself.
As a teen, Jesse's confidence bloomed.
Jesse loved to talk. He loved meeting new people, making new friends. When he was in high school, he wanted to try modeling. He did really well at it, and I always thought that he wouldn't go back to school, but a year from the date that he told us that he wanted to be a model, he said he wanted to be a lawyer. That's what he decided to do, and that's why he went to Missouri.
Linda said he was a journalism and history major who planned to go to law school.
Jesse Valencia was one of those larger-than-life characters. He had such a big personality. He had a lot of friends. He had a huge social group.
Now, detectives need to find out who cut Jesse's life short in such a horrific way. They start by asking Jack Barry about his relationship with Jesse.
Jack told them he and Jesse had just split up, and he was trying to make Jesse realize it's over. I need to move on. Jesse still loved Jack, so he was having a hard time letting go. But Jack was already starting to see someone else.
Was it a fight with a spurned lover that the neighbor had heard in the middle of the night?
It was possible Jack had some type of confrontation with Jesse that led to his death.
And when investigators asked Jack for an alibi, it turns out that he doesn't seem to have one.
His alibi was, I was home sleeping alone. At that point, Jack Barry had become the primary suspect.
Coming up, detectives discover a secret romance
They had started a relationship very quickly
that uncovers a killer's trail
A lie is the next best thing to a confession.
to a surprising culprit.
It was shocking on many levels.
Detectives in Columbia, Missouri are questioning a man who had recently split up with murdered college student Jesse Valencia.
Jack Barry wanted to end the relationship. He wasn't happy with the relationship any longer.
Jack paints a picture of a couple growing apart after 2 years of dating. But a piece of evidence found at Jesse's apartment makes detectives question his story.
The investigating detectives found Jesse's cell phone, and the cell phone showed that Jesse had called Jack Barry at about 3:18 that night.
The neighbors had heard some type of argument from the victim's apartment, approximately the time frame of when this occurred. So that would be obviously suspicious.
But Jack insists he was nowhere near Jesse's apartment.
Jack said that he had already gone to bed that night and that he heard a knock on his door at 3:18 in the morning, and then he simultaneously got a phone call from Jesse's cell phone. It was routine that Jesse would use his cell phone as sort of a doorbell. Jack said he was tired and he really didn't feel like getting up and talking to his former boyfriend at 3:18 in the morning, so he didn't go to the door.
Jack says he rolled over and went back to sleep. But police aren't so sure and question him for hours.
Finally, Jack broke into tears and he said he regretted that. He didn't go to the door because what happened might not have happened had he done that. His reaction was so genuine, and it was clear that Jack still had a lot of love and affection for Jesse.
And it's becoming clear to detectives that Jack didn't kill Jesse, but they press him to see if he might know who did.
Jack said that he had no clue as to what would have happened to him and why anyone would have killed him.
23-year-old Jesse Valencia, the MU student.
Police found Valencia's body on East Campus, throat slashed.
As the story of the murder hits the 11 o'clock news, it sends shockwaves through the city.
I would say this was probably one of the most gruesome killings in Columbia. We don't have very many murders here.
The murder of a gay young man just a week before the city's first Pride Fest horrifies the progressive college community.
For anyone who thinks that they can get away with something like this so heinous is just unthinkable. We know from past homicides that a majority of them are with people that they know. Anyone who had had contact with him, whether in a sexual relationship or a social relationship, the detectives wanted to talk to.
Police begin to make the rounds of Jesse's wide circle of friends, wondering if there's anyone in his life that might have harbored any kind of grudge. One name they hear over and over is Zev Feintuck, a student that Jesse had met 2 weeks earlier at a political rally.
Jesse's friends had said, oh, maybe it was this guy because he didn't seem quite normal. There was something that made him a little bit different from other people.
Several of Jesse's friends, they said that Zev wasn't comfortable in his own skin and that he had a lot of issues with being himself. There was some contention whether Zev and Jesse were having a romantic relationship. They were spending a lot of time together.
Rumors about the two young men had been swirling, and after Jesse was murdered, the gossip about Zev began to take a sinister tone.
Somebody saw someone matching his description, looking disheveled and crying, walking down the street the morning of the murder, and a car he was known to drive was seen in that area.
That's when the detectives started looking towards him and started talking with him and seeing what he had to say.
Detectives call Zev down to the station, but he denies that the rumors about him and Jesse are true.
Zev said they'd never had a sexual relationship, but they were friends. Then Zev would come over and he'd hang out with him.
Police questioned Zev about where he was between 3 and 5 a.m.
His alibi was, I was home sleeping. He was a young man who still lived with his parents.
They subject Zev to a voice stress analysis test to see if he is telling the truth.
It showed untruthful, so deceitful. That did seem to be some evidence of guilt.
Detectives quickly follow up with a visit to his parents, but they confirm that their son was home all night.
Zev's parents had said that when Zev would leave, he would always go through the garage door to get to the car, and so it made a big racket that would have awakened his parents, and they said there's no way that he would have left that night. It seemed like he did have an alibi.
With Zev Feintuck discounted as a suspect, detectives continue to piece together the last hours of Jesse Valencia's life.
The detectives were talking with several of the friends of Jesse Valencia to see where he was on the evening and early morning hours that this occurred.
Police learned that Jesse had gone to a party at a friend's house around 11 p.m. on the night he was killed.
Some friends of Jesse said that Friday night, Jesse was at a party with a young man named Ed McDevitt.
Ed McDevitt was somebody Jesse had just met. Ed was a chef in town. They had met just a couple of nights before and had started a relationship very quickly.
Jesse's friends tell police that the two men left the party together, heading in the direction of Jesse's house.
And that was around 3 o'clock in the morning on the last night of Jesse's life.
It appears as though Ed McDevitt might have been the last person to see Jesse alive.
And it was possible Ed McDevitt went home with Jesse and then killed him.
12 hours after finding Jesse Valencia's body, detectives track down 22-year-old Ed McDevitt and bring him down to the station.
Jesse had met Ed McDevitt 2 days before his death and invited Ed to come home with him on that Friday night, the last night of Jesse's life, so he became a suspect at that point.
But Ed claims that he and Jesse went their separate ways soon after they left the party.
And he was talking with Jesse on the phone at the time he was walking home on the last night of Jesse's life.
Ed says that his roommate was up when he arrived home and invites detectives over to talk to him themselves.
There's nothing found when they searched his home, and everything Ed McDevitt told the officers they could verify by looking at his cell phone records, by talking to his roommate, and at that point, investigators let him go.
Police hope the DNA results pending at the lab will help them link one of their suspects to Jesse's murder. Desperate for answers, Jesse's mom grows more despondent, recalling an eerie premonition Jesse had years ago.
From the time Jesse was 7 years old, he had told me that he was going to die at a young age. He said, I'm going to die at a young age, and I love all of you, and I always will love you, but I'll be okay. He would always end it with, I'll be okay. And of course I got emotional and upset over it, but he said, we've got to make the most of what time I'm here.
A day after Jesse's murder, detectives receive the autopsy report and study it closely for clues.
The medical examiner concluded that Jesse had been murdered in the area of 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. The cut to his neck was the only knife wound, and it was the cause of death. And it was so deep, the blade of the knife had also nicked the spine.
The lack of defense wounds suggests that Jesse had been taken by surprise.
The most mysterious thing was that across his breastbone there were bruises, and in the middle of his back between his shoulder blade there were bruises.
The evidence suggests that Jesse was easily overpowered in the vicious attack. Investigators hope that additional lab work will reveal even more and point to a killer.
There were fingernail scrapings collected during the autopsy, and also some hairs were found on his chest, and that was sent to the crime lab for analysis.
Until the crime lab turns up DNA, police have no choice but to move on to their next lead.
A lot of Jesse's friends were being brought in, they were giving evidence, they were helping out with information.
One of those friends is a fellow student named Andy.
Andy Schermerhorn was a young man who had what they called a friends with benefits arrangement with Jesse.
Andy was out of town the night Jesse was killed, but the day after the murder, he comes forward to share a shocking story.
Andy Schermerhorn told the investigating detectives that Jesse was having sex with a Columbia police officer.
He was having a relationship with an officer. I was surprised.
Andy nervously reveals an encounter 3 weeks prior at Jesse's apartment.
Andy Schermerhorn said that on May 14th, he had been at Jesse's home at night, and there was a knock at the door. And Jesse went to the door, and a uniformed police officer was there. And Jesse said, "It's okay, oh, it's okay, he's cool, he's cool."
According to Andy, the officer took off his gun belt, and the next thing Andy knew, the three of them were fooling around.
After it was over, the police officer said, "This has got to be a secret."
A secret affair between an officer and a murder victim is a major red flag.
If any one of our officers had been seeing Jesse Valencia, why is he not being forthcoming? If you have nothing to hide, why not just tell us?
Detectives need to know who this officer is.
They said, "Do you think you'd be able to recognize him if you saw him again?" And he said yes, because it had only been about 2 weeks since that incident.
Detectives ask Andy if he'll look through a book containing the photo of every officer in the Columbia Police Department.
They were having him walk down the hall where he was going to look at the yearbook. Andy Schermerhorn flipped through it without even looking at the pages, closed it, and Schermerhorn began trembling, and he said, "I passed him in the hallway just now. It was him."
The day after the murder of Jesse Valencia, detectives in Columbia, Missouri learned that he was allegedly having a relationship with a local police officer.
Jesse's friend Andy Schermerhorn told the investigating detectives that he was an eyewitness to this sexual activity. Schermerhorn began trembling, and he said, "It was him that I passed in the hallway just now." And that was Stephen Arthur Rios.
Stephen Rios' commander believes Andy must be mistaken about the officer's identity.
When the detectives told me that maybe Steve had been having a relationship with the victim, I told the detectives, "You're absolutely wrong. He was married to a wonderful young lady, and they had just had their first child."
Schwartz knows the 27-year-old Rios well. The 5-year veteran is one of the department's rising young stars.
Steve was very outgoing. He communicated well, very ambitious.
He was a young officer who was on his way up in the department because he was a go-getter and a very popular officer.
Detectives don't know if Andy is telling the truth, but they're certainly anxious to get Rios' side of the story.
If he was having a relationship, that does not mean that he had killed Jesse Valencia.
Rios is out of town for a couple of days on a camping trip with coworkers. So they begin tracing Rios' steps the day Jesse's body was found.
He went in for his work shift later in the afternoon, like he normally did, and at that point, the body had been found.
The sergeant on duty that day had told me that Rios was coming to the scene to help identify the body. He had contacted the on-duty sergeant, but said he could help.
Rios said that I met Jesse Valencia when I gave him a ticket back on April 18th.
Investigators pull a copy of the incident report to see if it backs up Rios' story.
April 18th of 2004, some friends of Jesse's were having a party, and the party kept getting loud, and the police showed up to get them to quiet down. And Jesse, this intelligent pre-law major, said, "What's your probable cause?" Well, that got him arrested, and Stephen Rios gave him a municipal court summons for obstructing a governmental operation.
A call to Jesse's mother corroborates the report.
Jesse told me that when he was arrested, that the cop that drove him down to the jail was really nice, and that he talked to him all the way down to the station. And he said, I kind of felt a little bit uncomfortable because he kept asking me personal questions about my life that I didn't really feel like he should be asking me when he was trying to arrest me for something.
But the arrest wasn't the end of the officer's interest. The very next day, he turned up at Jesse's apartment.
After he got arrested, Jesse called me on the phone, and he said, the cop that arrested me last night showed up on my doorstep. He said he had to ask me some more questions, but the questions he was asking Jesse were more of a personal nature. They went out a few times after that, and he would come to Jesse's apartment and just show up unannounced, even when he was in uniform.
Linda doesn't know much more than that, but thinks that Jesse's friend Joan Sheridan might. When they track her down 2 days after the murder, Joan confirms that Jesse saw the officer more than once after the arrest.
He had told her that the officer would typically come by sometime after 3 o'clock and before 6 o'clock in the morning, just for sex, and then leave.
Joan reveals that she got a close-up look at the officer one night when he showed up at Jesse's place.
They showed her a photo lineup, and she was able to pick the person that came by to Jesse's apartment that night. And it was Steven Rios.
Detectives now have more evidence that Rios was having a scandalous relationship with Jesse. And when they hear what Joan says next, they suspect he may also have a motive for murder.
Joan said that when he went to court for his municipal court summons, Jesse assumed it would be dismissed since he was having sex with the arresting officer, and it had not been dismissed, and that had angered Jesse. So Jesse had told Joan that the next time the police officer comes over, I'm going to tell him that I have a little secret the chief of police might want to know if he doesn't get that ticket dismissed.
The detectives called me and told me that Jesse was threatening to contact the chief and expose Rios. Finally, the light bulb went off. You start looking at who had a motive to kill Jesse Valencia. Rios was very worried about his job. He was very worried about his reputation. He would be very devastated. He would be embarrassed by this information coming out.
That's when Rios became the suspect.
It's a serious matter to accuse one of their own. Investigators quickly regroup to plan the best approach.
They didn't feel they were ready to interview him yet. They were wanting to have the DNA evidence come back before they actually confronted him. But all of a sudden, Rios showed up at the police department and said, "Oh, could I talk to you for a second?"
He had this look on his face, like he was very upset. Very upset.
Coming up, detectives get a devastating phone call.
Steve called me, crying, very upset, and he said, "I've done a bad thing."
And the investigation takes an unexpected new turn.
The officers found him on the 4th floor of a parking garage.
What was he thinking?
Detectives investigating the murder of college student Jesse Valencia are preparing to confront their suspect, police officer Steven Rios. But Rios goes on the offensive first.
Rios said he was hearing from other people that Jesse was having an affair with a Columbia police officer. And I just wanted you to know that I did give him a ticket, but that's the only contact I had with him, and it's certainly not me.
But detectives tell him flat out that they've heard a different story.
They said, "We've talked to a woman who said that she was at Jesse's apartment one night when you showed up." Rios sat there for a minute. And then Rios said, "Well, you know what? We did become social friends, but it never became anything like a sexual relationship." They said, "You know, we've talked to another young man who says he was actually having sex with Jesse, and you came by that night and actually came in and joined them on the bed." And Rios said, "What, sex?" Like it was the most astounding and false accusation you could ever heard.
He was getting very agitated with the detectives. He's a very prideful person, and he was very upset because they didn't believe him.
It's easy to see that Rios is lying. Detectives bear down hard. And finally, their suspect breaks.
Finally, Rios admitted that he had sex with Jesse. He tried to claim it was just that one time, And then it evolved into that he had had sex with Jesse as many as 6 times.
It's a stunning admission and a strong motive for murder.
He was embarrassed. He obviously did not want this information out if he was keeping it a secret to begin with, especially from his wife, you know, in his family.
Police may not have the physical evidence to prove that Rios is a killer, but they do have something that's almost as good.
We were able to prove that he was lying.
There's an old saying in law enforcement that a lie, a provable lie, is the next best thing to a confession. And Stephen Rios was caught in lots of provable lies.
But detectives aren't finished interrogating their suspect. They ask for his whereabouts the night that Jesse was killed.
He said he had been at work and he got off at 3 o'clock in the morning like he normally did. And he said that that night he'd gone onto the rooftop of the parking garage with a few other officers and they had drank a few beers before they went home. And he said he got home about 5:15 to 5:30, took a shower, and got in bed.
Detectives grill Rios for over 3 hours, looking for any cracks in his story.
He still maintained he'd had nothing to do with Jesse's death. At that point, investigators let him go. He was definitely a suspect, but the question remained, can we prove it beyond a reasonable doubt?
Investigators' next step is to create a timeline for the night of Jesse's murder and see how Rios' alibi fits in.
His wife corroborated that he had gotten home in that 5:15 to 5:30 time frame.
Other officers confirm Rios worked until 3 a.m. and then had some drinks with them on the rooftop that night. The security door records reveal that Rios left the roof at 4:37 a.m., 45 minutes before he got home.
One of the detectives actually drove from the parking garage to Jesse's home the same time of night, and it was 3.5 minutes. He then drove from the scene of the murder to Rios' home, and it was 10 minutes.
This gave a window of time of 20 to 30 minutes that were potentially unaccounted for at the time that Jesse Valencia was apparently killed.
And this gave us a timeline that could show that Rios could have done this murder within that time.
Investigators search Rios' home, car, and work locker, but they uncover nothing to tie him to the crime. Then, out of the blue, Captain Schwartz receives an alarming phone call.
Steve called me crying, very upset, and he said, I've done a bad thing. The first question I asked him was, where are you? And he said that he was in Kansas City and that he had bought a shotgun. I really thought he was going to kill himself. And my first reaction was no. I said, you need to just stop what you're doing. Just come back. Just come back to Columbia and we'll get through it.
Captain Schwartz is able to talk Rios into driving the 150 miles back home, where police take him into custody.
He still wasn't under arrest, but he was put on a 96-hour hold for an involuntary commitment to a mental facility, just for observation to make sure that he wouldn't kill himself.
But Stephen Rios is still despondent. He manages to evade hospital security, and soon the entire Columbia police force is on alert.
I got a phone call that Steve had escaped and was on top of the parking garage, threatening suicide.
One of the officers found him on the 4th floor of a parking garage, and Rios climbed up on the wall, claiming he was going to jump.
When they called me and said he's on top of the garage, he's threatening suicide, what was he doing? What was he thinking?
Police officer Steven Rios, a suspect in the murder of Jesse Valencia, has escaped protective custody and is threatening to leap to his death.
This is one of the busiest parts of campus. It's about 7 o'clock at night. He goes to the roof of the parking garage, starts threatening to jump.
There's a crowd below. There are people watching this. People are videotaping this, taking pictures. It's bizarre.
Police arrive on the scene to try to talk Rios off the ledge.
All I could think of was, here we go again. Why are you putting everyone through this? It was just putting everyone through a nightmare.
After a tense 45-minute standoff, they finally managed to talk Rios back from the brink.
He was taken back into custody and again put into a mental facility and put on a suicide watch while we were finishing our investigation to determine whether or not he would be charged with Jesse's murder.
3 weeks after Jesse's murder, the analysis of the hairs found on Jesse's chest give police the evidence they need to charge Rios with the crime.
They were able to say the persons who left those hairs on Jesse's chest, limb hairs that would have come from somebody's arm, those hairs matched to Steven Rios. And that's when we realized that they teach Columbia police officers at the training academy how to administer a chokehold, and that cuts off the blood flow to the brain and renders a person unconscious in 3 to 8 seconds. That could account for these limb hairs, in addition to the bruises that went across the front of his chest and in the middle of his back.
On July 1st, 26 days after Jesse Valencia's body was found, Steven Arthur Rios is arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
Did you kill Jesse Valencia?
No, I did not.
During the week-long trial, prosecutors lay out their theory of how the murder went down.
Rios came by after his shift was over, thinking they were going to have sex. Jesse confronted him.
Jesse was threatening to contact the chief and expose Rios.
And he knew his career and his happy marriage would probably be over. And that had angered Rios. The neighbor heard this argument going on, and Jesse's yelling, "Stop it, stop it." Jesse, then clad only in his shorts and barefoot, ran out, being chased by Steven Rios. The Steven Rios caught him from behind and choked him into unconsciousness, put him on the ground, cut his throat, and that's what I believe happened in the last minutes of Jesse Valencia's life.
Prosecutors know they have a strong case, but convincing a jury that a police officer is a murderer is sure to be a hard sell.
If even one of the 12 jurors feels like it's not the person, then you have a hung jury or a not guilty verdict.
After 8 long hours, the jury returns with a verdict.
The jury finds the defendant, Steven Arthur Rios, guilty of murder in the second degree.
I did feel a great sense of relief and even pride when the case was over and Steven Rios had not gotten away with murder.
Steven Arthur Rios receives a sentence of life in prison for the slaying of Jesse Valencia.
I don't feel like that Jesse really got justice because I wanted the death penalty for him. He took my whole life away from me.
Anytime you have an officer who has done a heinous type act like this and taken someone's life, it is a huge stain. and for law enforcement everywhere.
For Jesse's mother, her son's legacy is in the way he lived his life, not the way it ended.
I want people to remember the Jesse that was constantly laughing and trying to make other people happy, because that's what Jesse lived for. He didn't want anybody to be sad. There's always the empty space. Everybody still misses him, and we talk about him daily.